It's precisely 10 minutes to the hour. You're listening, of course, to Radio France International's Paris Live PM programme. Time now for Live on Live, when Paris Live PM welcomes a special guest into our studios. Today the topic is Syria, as we heard earlier in the programme. Consultation aimed at finding a political solution to the war in the country is due to start in Geneva this Friday, and the consultation will last about 6 months. The negotiations were delayed because of disagreement over who would be asked to attend, something that still hasn't been made public. Joining me today is Emma Suleiman, who works as an independent consultant with NGOs inside Syria. You're very welcome to the programme, Emma.
Thank you, Amanda.
Now, the UN Special Envoy, Staffan de Mistura, has admitted that a decision over exactly who's going to take part in the talks is still continuing. Obviously, it's a major sticking point. So is there a chance that these talks on Friday could again be delayed?
I don't think it will be delayed again because obviously there is a strong will by the peace negotiation sponsors, U.S. and Russia, to hold the peace talk even without attendees, because they're desperate to show that there has been some progress on the Syria front. The negotiation is still being on at the moment to decide who attends. Actually, as you just said, Russia disagreed on the opposition delegation that was named in Riyadh, and suggested, this was in the last few weeks, because they wanted to introduce their pro-regime, pro-Russia opposition, while the mainstream opposition refused to attend the peace talk if there is any addition to their list of 17 names delegation, knowing that the delegation is led by Jaish al-Islam political leader. His name is Mohammed Alloush, and Jaish al-Islam, or Islam Army, is considered as a terrorist opposition fraction by Russia and by other parties, which is why Russia is against that. There was some suggestions to add another pro-Russia, pro-Assad delegation to the talk, but some of these opposition refused actually to enter in a new delegation. Mr. de Mistura wanted to also, there was also talks about having a third delegation from the civil society. Since it was so complicated, and Syria crisis is extremely internationalized and complicated, that's why I think he came up with the solution of, let's call them indirect consultation with many parts on the side, to 6 months or even more, to find a common background to launch the negotiation. Because the delegation is part of the problem, but that's not all the problem. The regime has turned Geneva to peace talk from its main purpose of finding a political transition in Syria, and turned it into combating terrorism and focused on humanitarian issues. But basically none of these humanitarian deals were implemented or were put in place since 2 years, apart from the Madaya Kafreya Foa, which happened recently because of a social media campaign and because of international pressure. So today this Geneva 3, or we can call it Geneva 3, really has changed priorities. We no longer see Assad as the goal. We no longer see a transitional governing body as a goal. We focus on minor. Humanitarian issue. Humanitarian crisis is the biggest now in the world, but it's becoming a goal today, together with the ceasefire. So this is why now we're we're repositioning Assad from a goal, from being the goal that we want to take down to a partner, a potential partner, and with the potential to rerun for presidency again, and which means that this is in no way a solution or near a solution in the future to the Syrian crisis.
Is that what makes these talks, these peace negotiations, so impossible? The fact that they are so multifaceted. We're not just looking at a political solution, but we're also talking about, more regional issues, and of course, the humanitarian issue there on the ground in Syria. Is that why they're so complicated, and why in February 2014 Geneva 2 failed?
In my opinion, because there is no international will to sort out the Syrian crisis today. Even since 2014, since the Geneva one and all the conferences that followed, whether in Cairo, Moscow, or Riyadh, because we're not on the same page. The regime is not willing to provide any concession whatsoever, not even on the humanitarian front. He's using food and medicine as war crimes, war weapons, and the international community until today, the UN, could not provide the humanitarian corridors and could not put any pressure on the regime to comply with that. However, today we see more pressure on the opposition to comply with what the regime wants, and this is just this is crazy. I don't see this as making any sense today. How could we not in 4 or 5 years put any pressure to facilitate the humanitarian corridors or ceasefire? There has been some deals on the ground, which the method they followed called bottom up on some areas, and they reached some peace deals, but you need to implement that nationwide.
Which is the goal of these talks. It's a nationwide ceasefire, with, of course, the exception of the Al-Nusra Front and Islamic State.
Yeah, but how could you reach that if you cannot put any pressure or any conditions today on the regime to show any goodwill of stopping the bombardment, removing the siege? There are 52 towns under siege in Syria since 2 years today. 49 of them are by the regime and Hezbollah. How if you cannot put any pressure on the regime to do this today, how could you show any goodwill? On the other side, the regime is coming with a precondition to the talks. He is selecting the delegation he wants to talk with. And this is if you're going to have a pro-Assad, pro-Russia regime, you might as well have the regime talk to itself.
I understand. So is this then, does this potentially mean that the Syrian opposition won't attend these talks? The fact that certain preconditions have not been met, such as easing bombardments on the ground and so on?
In the beginning, yes. Today, there is the negotiation are still happening in Riyadh. Many said that they have not received. Other opposition did not receive the invitation to attend yet. The mainstream opposition agreed to attend without preconditions if they present only the list of 17 delegations that they have agreed on in Riyadh. We'll find out I think by the end of the day.
And just my last question to you. You mentioned Medea and the fact that it did take so long for those humanitarian corridors to be opened and for aid to be delivered because of the social media campaign. It was a big media story just a few weeks ago, but it seems to have fallen off the radar. What's the situation on the ground? Is aid being delivered where it needs to go?
Yes, of course, the deal was put in place, but you know what was the main points of the deal? You let aid go into Medea if you at the same time you let it. You let it into pro-regime areas, the only two towns besieged by the rebels. The situation in Medea, I think aid was in. However, people were not let out. And even people in need and more people. I heard that there are about 60 people who died since 11 since the aid has been in.
And our thanks there to Emma Suleiman, an opposition spokesperson who works with NGOs inside Syria.